The president could come right before the committee and speak all the truth that he wants if he wants to.
You don't expect him
if he wants to take the oath of office, or he could do it in writing. He has every opportunity to present his case.
So, and he is responding to that already today. Get to that in a moment. President Trump answering that call about testifying, if it'll get to Congress focused again, as Democratic leaders ratchet up the pressure. I want to bring in our headliner, New York Republican Lee Zeldin, Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. You've been a part of these depositions as well, sir. I believe you've attended every single one behind closed doors. Is that a fair thing to say?
Almost okay. 100%.
All right, so this week, 8 witnesses, 3 days of hearings. Tell our viewers what the story will be this week.
Well, tomorrow you're going to hear from someone like a former special envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker. His deposition, his transcribed interview was very informative. This is the first person who came before these 3 committees inside of the Capitol basement bunker that Adam Schiff has, the most secure room in the Capitol. And he was telling us about how President Zelensky didn't know that there was a hold on aid on July 25th, that in the readout he made no reference to a quid pro quo or a hold on aid on July 26th. He meets with Sondland and Volker, makes no reference to quid pro quo or a hold on aid. And then the weeks that follow, Ukraine makes no reference to any of us about any quid pro quo or a hold on aid. They only learn that there's a hold on aid at the end of August. The aid gets released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine has to do nothing in order to get that released. We've heard about President Zelensky telling us he didn't feel any demand, there was no pressure, there was no quid pro quo, there's been nothing wrong. But now you're going to hear it from somebody like Kurt Volker tomorrow and other witnesses who have important facts, others who have speculation, second, third, fourth hand hearsay that's less helpful. And one other thing that's important to point out is, you mentioned these depositions. We had one Friday, we had one on Saturday. These transcripts still aren't released. So if somebody wants to ask a question tomorrow, let's say, based off of something said on Saturday, you can't because the transcripts are still in hiding.
So you were in on the closed door meetings Friday night, Saturday morning. What is it that concerns you most about Adam Schiff's narrative?
Well, it was directly contradicted, for example, when you bring in Mark Sandy, who is a dedicated career staffer at the Office of Management and Budget, to answer the threshold question of why there was a hold placed on aid to Ukraine. He provides his answer. He provided that answer multiple times in different forms of the same exact question and consistently providing the same answer. And it's directly contradictory to Adam Schiff's quid pro quo fantasy, the extortion fantasy, the bribery fantasy. So release the transcripts before we have another open hearing. You shouldn't have another open hearing before that. 2
specific questions. Wall Street Journal reporting this morning that what Sondland said is that he was keeping Mick Mulvaney and Rick Perry abreast of what the Ukrainians were doing with regard to investigations or lack thereof. Is that true?
Well, all I know from Ambassador Sondland is what he testified during his deposition, which I attended. I asked questions. I heard all of his answers. He provided an addendum. I would have a follow-up question. For example, he said that he had a presumption in his addendum. Well, where did you get that from if the President of the United States directly, firsthand information, told you there was no quid pro quo, he didn't want anything? So there's going to be some new questions, I would gather, that might get asked on Wednesday. We'll see what he has to say. But I can't...
As you said, an addendum. He changed his testimony. Is that going to be a problem for him?
Well, he's going to have to answer the question with regards to saying that he had a presumption that is inconsistent with what he not only previously testified to, but also directly contradictory to what the President of the United States told him. If the President of the United States tells him no quid pro quo, that I do not want anything from Ukraine, and then he provides that addendum, he's going to have to answer a question to that or two.
We'll see how he does. Adam Schiff over the weekend, I think this was Saturday. I want you to play. I'm going to play this soundbite and get you to react. Here is Schiff from over the weekend in California.
2 years ago, I stood before you and I urged you to resist, and you did. But we are more than a resistance now. We are a majority. We are a majority in one house, and we will become the majority in the other. And we will send that charlatan in the White House back to the golden throne he came from.
Is that the Adam Schiff you know?
Listen, my background's the military. There are a lot of great people in the military I would follow into combat. If they were charging a hill, I would follow them. I would die for them. I'd fight with them. I would never want to have to charge a hill with Adam Schiff leading the charge. What you saw in that speech is it's really disgusting rhetoric. It's divisive. What we've seen from this entire impeachment charade is an effort that essentially and eagerly tears our country in half. We should be focusing on important priorities for our constituents, but instead for him to give that kind of a speech over the weekend, it's sick. It's not helpful for our country. It's divisive, and it's not bringing us together. And no, I wouldn't be following him. Is that the Adam Schiff that I know? Unfortunately, we're seeing that more and more consistently. And to that opening audio you played of what Nancy Pelosi said, I wouldn't encourage the president at all. It would be a heck no for me as far as my advice of whether or not he should come testify. Adam Schiff has created this process where he gives himself 45 minutes at the beginning of this open hearing. The president wouldn't just be lowering himself to Adam Schiff's level. He would be lowering himself below Adam Schiff's level. And to that resistance point that you just played from Adam Schiff, there's a GIF that is all over the internet from a couple years ago of a woman who's just screaming at the sky because she still hasn't coped with the 2016 election. I think that's what that hearing would be. And the president to sit through that while these people just scream at the sky inside of Longworth 1100 is just not the right scene for the president. He should be focused on the priorities of the country and not bring himself not just down to Adam Schiff's level, but below it.
Wow. I mean, that says it all right there. Chuck Schumer is also calling for the president to testify. Here he is yesterday, and then I wanted to ask you to follow up on this.
If Donald Trump doesn't agree with what he's hearing, doesn't like what he's hearing, he shouldn't tweet. He should come to the committee and testify under oath, and he should allow all those around him to come to the committee and testify under oath.
All right, so here's what the president tweeted about that. Our crazy do-nothing, where's USMCA infrastructure, lower drug pricing, and much more. Speaker of the House, nervous Nancy Pelosi, who is petrified by her radical left, knowing she will soon be gone. They and fake news media are her boss, suggested on Sundays, deface the nation. That I testify about the phony impeachment witch hunt. She also said I could do it in writing, even though I did nothing wrong, and don't like giving credibility to this no due process hoax. I like the idea and will, in order to get Congress focused again, strongly consider it. Strongly slim chances on this ever happening. I mean, you agree that the president should not be stooping to Schiff's level, as you just stated. But what does it say about the president of the United States, who's actually willing to go in on his own impeachment inquiry and testify to show that he has nothing to hide?
And he has been showing that he has nothing to hide. He has been providing us with facts for those who are willing to listen. As far as providing something in writing, maybe he should send an autographed copy of his son's new book, Triggered. And the title, I think, sums up is why we're having this entire process in the first place. The problem is that the president is providing facts. And we're talking about the facts here on your network. There are a lot of people who are getting their news from other places, and they're not getting all of the information. I would encourage them to tune in when Kurt Volker is testifying and some of these others. Just get the facts. The president should keep putting it out, but not play to this game that Pelosi and Schumer are daring him to.
Thank you for your time, sir. Lee Zeldin, the Republican from New York on the Hill.
Thank you.